Reynolds? I believe in all of you guys. I really do. All right, well, let's look at our handout. So today we're going to be talking about the early industrial revolution. And so a revolution's where there's like a huge change, and we're talking about huge changes in this time period from 1760 to 1851. And one of the biggest changes, if you look at the picture on the screen, is that there's going to be a new way that we're making clothing. We're going to see increasingly the use of machinery in making clothing, and also children working on the machines that are making clothing. So there's some big changes that are happening here. And before the use of machines, let me pass that. With the use of machines, what's going to happen to the cost of clothes? It's going to go up? Why? Well, I'm getting two different answers. I need some whys. That's just like a rule. Why would it go down? What's that? Yeah, I mean, it's going to make it faster, right? Because imagine you're going to prom or you're going to homecoming and you go to like Macy's and buy a dress. There's hundreds of those types of dresses, maybe thousands produced. But if you're going to go to prom and had a custom-made dress, what's the price of that custom-made dress where the one you're wearing is the only one on the planet?
It's going to be up.
Yeah, it's going to be high. And so before the use of machinery, we were going to have people making everything by hand. Super expensive. But the big change, the revolution at this time period, is that we're going to be using machinery and steam power to run that machinery to transform the way we get things. So today we're really going to start talking about the early beginnings of the Industrial Revolution today. In fact, we're going to cover today 4 different causes of the Industrial Revolution in England. We're going to talk about population growth. We'll talk about agricultural revolutions. We'll talk about the expansion of trade, and we'll talk about England's openness to experimentation. So those are the 4 things. We're going to get through this whole thing today. We're going to turn it in. We're going to start off our 6 weeks with a 100, which would be good because some of us definitely needed some assistance last 6 weeks. So first of all, population. It says that a growth in population increases the demand for goods. I started working at our high school all the way back in 2002. In 2002, there was a lot of things LaPorte did not have. LaPorte did not have an H-E-B. LaPorte did not have a Walmart in 2002. Those were all things that have come with time. And other things have come with time too, like there's a Mod Pizza now in LaPorte. There's a lot of new businesses in LaPorte. And as the city grows, so does our demand for stuff. We want to have things that are nice and new. Well, the same thing happened in Europe with the increased population. People are demanding new things, which is great. And what we see at this time is that with so many people being born, not only are there more things, but it says on your handout, lowers the cost of labor. Because if I have hundreds of kids being born, thousands of kids actually being born at this time, you know what? Let's say that I offer you a job for $1 a day. And let's say one of these kids says, no, thanks, I don't want to work for $1 a day. There's so many kids, what's going to happen to that vacancy that I have for $1 a day? Like, someone's going to take it. Someone's going to be willing to work for $1 a day. So there's so many people being born, so many kids, so many laborers that the cost of labor actually goes down. And if you just look at some of the numbers I'm going to provide you as evidence of how quickly the population of Europe is growing. It says on your handout that the population of Europe had grown from 100 million back in 1650 all the way to 266 million in 1850. That's a significance, almost a tripling of the population over the course of 200 years, from 100 million to 266 million. And the country in Europe that had the fastest population growth is going to be England. And that's really one of the reasons why when we look at the history of the Industrial Revolution, you need to have demand for stuff. You need to have a lot of people available to work. and England has both. They're where the Industrial Revolution begins, and they have the fastest population growth in England. In fact, look at these three numbers to kind of give you an example of how fast the population of England is growing. In 1700, England had 6 million people living there. I mean, that's a good sized population, and that good sized population goes up. It says 100 years later, their population grew to 9 million people. But the most impressive part of population growth is what happens just 50 years later. I mean, from 6 to 9 million, that's good and all. But what happens in 1851, population doubles to 18 million. In just 50 years, the population of England doubled from 9 to 18 million. That's incredible. You know, if LaPorte's population, if LaPorte High School has been here for more than 50 years, if our population doubled, we'd have a 4,000 person high school. We'd have to do what Deer Park does. What does Deer Park do to deal with they have what? They have 2 campuses, right? And like, eventually, that's probably the future of LaPorte High School. We'll eventually have 2 campuses because they're building subdivisions, they're building new neighborhoods, they're building new apartment complexes. That may well be the future of LaPorte. Here, their population doubled to 18 million. So the question is why? Well, 2 causes for growth. Number 1, we'll write down for causes for growth. Number 1, less disease. You know, disease was a declining factor at this time, and disease can make a definite impact. In fact, right now we're about to enter the 1-year anniversary of COVID-19. We have about 500,000 Americans died from COVID over the last 11 months. We also know that COVID-19 has actually reduced the average lifespan of the average American because of its effects it's had. Now, good news, we know that about 1 million people get the vaccine every single day. There's about 320 million Americans. Every day, 1 million people get the shot. That's the vaccine. That's about 94% of it, which is amazing. And also, a new study shows that we think that by April, we'll reach, what is it called when so many people have it that the chance of it spreading is very low? No. Yeah, we're going to reach what is called herd immunity, probably by April, because so many people have gotten COVID-19 that we think we'll hit herd immunity by April. So we have herd immunity coming up probably in the next 8 weeks. We have 1 million people a day getting the shot. If you look at the daily infection rate, it used to be Texas every single day we had about 20 to 30,000 people every day getting sick. That's a lot, 20 to 30,000 a day. Today, I just checked, our 3-day average is 5,000. So we have about a 75% reduction in how many people are getting COVID, and it's actually going down all around the country, on average about 70 to 75%. These are all really good things. Here, these really good things meant population was exploding. Second cause for growth on that same line, we'll write down new food from America. And we'll talk about this in a different section. We've actually already talked about and learned about new foods from America making an impact. We'll revisit that shortly. But really the 2 things you should have, less disease and new foods from America. More details to come on that in just a little bit. But so many people were having kids, and it used to be that I have 9 kids and 4 of them might die of malnutrition, or maybe there's a really hard winter, they wouldn't make it. Even with this cold snap we had in 2021, I think a few dozen people died. I think there was one story I saw, like a 12-year-old died or a 9-year-old, and yes, so a lot of people did really foolish things like carbon monoxide poisoning. But I think I saw one boy's family suing the energy company or whatever for $100 million for wrongful death, because the argument is they were told that you should winterize, prepare, because what happened is our coal factories and our windmills froze. And so if you go to West Texas, you see these big turbines, they could have winterized them, because we actually use wind turbines in Antarctica, they can run, but you have to prepare them for that. And we never did that in Texas. And so when the cold snap came, those big turbines just froze shut. Same thing happened with our coal-fired power plants. They froze too. And so we just weren't prepared. And so I think this one couple suing $100 million for the people who run our Texas electric grid because we never prepared, you know. We didn't think it would ever happen, that we would have that many cold days that long in a row. I mean, that's a good question. I don't know. If I mean, what's that? Well, I mean, they lost a child, you know. That's a loss, right? Like from some of you told me you went like a day and a half without electricity. I don't know if like that's really a comparison, you know. So it says so many people were having these kids that 40% of the population was under the age of 15. 40% of the population was 15 or younger. It's like a very young country because people are having all these kids, and these kids, they're not dying. Well, what am I going to do if I don't have a public school system? There's no school for these kids, for most of these kids to go to. Now, if you're rich, you have like private tutors and all that kind of cool stuff. But for the average person, if you're just like a, farmer, or you just like have land, you're just getting by, and, I got 8 kids, I got 9 kids, and you know what? The farm can't support all those people. I got to do something with those kids. And so it says it resulted in the use of child labor. Now, we still have child labor today in 2021 all around the world. Children harvest tea in East Africa. I think it's some like 20% of the. What's that? That's not child labor. That's not the same thing. That's just like you doing what you're supposed to do to like be able to live at your house. I'm talking about like you're 9, you're 8 years old, and you're like harvesting tea in a plantation in Uganda. Like that's like real child labor. Or like you're a kid and you're forced to like work in a mine in Congo. Like that's real child labor. Or you are like you work in a sweatshop in Vietnam, putting together shirts in like, unsanitary conditions. That's child labor. And it still exists today. Millions and millions of kids are child laborers. But that's just what happens. I don't have school. I don't have a place for these kids to go. So these kids are going to be sent to work. And to get a job for these kids, we see a lot of migration to cities. People like, I lived in the country, but now I'm moving to the city. I'm looking for these jobs. People from Ireland and England are on the move. And it says they also generally moved to the Americas. Generally to the Americas. Because if I'm a poor person, I don't necessarily want to stay in London. Like, what options do I have? What choices do I have? I'm just going to like work in this crowded city and my kids are just like work in factories. But the thing about America, you know what America has to offer that London doesn't have to offer? Let's say that I want to move to Virginia, but I don't have enough money. What can I do to get a ride to Virginia? What can I become? Hitchhiker. Not a hitchhiker. I could become a vocabulary term we studied. I could become an indentured servant, right? I work 3 years, work 4 years. At the end of that, I don't get paid except for like food and lodging. At the end of that, you know what? I get my freedom and I get to buy a piece of land. There's a lot of land to be given away in America because what did we do? Where did we, the United States, get all that land from? Yeah, we like took it from the Native Americans, right? So we're like, oh, there's land available for everyone because we had killed or forced people off the land. So a lot of people make it move to the Americas. It says, last line on this section, we see a high population increases demand, and we also see lower cost of labor. With so many kids running around, I don't have to offer them a lot. Because if one kid says no to my ridiculously low wage, I'm going to find someone who's willing to pay it. Lower cost of labor. Now let's go to the section that's called Agricultural Revolution. So we've studied this already, but you should know for 2 crops, brand new crops from America that provided more calories at a lower cost than anything that had ever been raised in Europe before. What are those 2? Tobacco and? Well, I'm not like living off sugar. I mean, maybe some teenagers might, but like food. Rice. No, not rice. Not beans. Corn. We're going to write down potatoes and corn. If you ever go to HEB or Kroger, a bag of potatoes is like one of the cheapest things you can buy. It's super cheap. It's super tough. Like, it's not hard to grow potatoes. Plus, like, the freeze we just had, a lot of plants and rose bushes died, but it's going to be hard to kill a potato. In fact, it's so cheap and so filled with calories, Irish people will end up eating it for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. You know, uh, what's that? I'm so sorry that happened to you. Corn also, right? Super cheap, filled with calories. These are two things from America that allow poor white people to get by. Without Chris Columbus, there would not be a Columbian exchange. There would be no potatoes, no corn for poor white people. The Industrial Revolution, which depended on a bunch of poor children to work in the factories, may not have happened in the exact same way. There's a second thing, though, that happens to do with farming, and it's a vocabulary word that you should be familiar with, and it's the word, the enclosure movement. So if you look at that, there's at least a word in the word enclosure that's familiar. What word is familiar in the word enclosure? Yeah. Like during the ice storm, they closed the Fred Hartman Bridge, the Baytown Bridge, they closed parts of the freeways. If something's closed, you're not allowed there anymore. And there's something that people closed at this time where people weren't allowed to do what they had always done. Well, back at this time, let's say that you own cows or chickens or goats or sheep. Well, your animals could just kind of like graze, kind of like wild. There's a lot of land, and you could just like let your cows out, and they'd go and eat the grass, and at night they come back. You let your goats out, your chickens, and they eat what they need, and they come back at night. But today, if you drive along Fairmont or Spencer, you see there's barbed wire dividing land. They didn't have anything like that originally. Originally, it was like, you know what? We're all in this together. The land is owned by no one, really, and like we all kind of have access to it. Well, at this time, rich people didn't like that anymore. They're like, I don't really like the fact that like anyone can just like have their animals anywhere. And so they started closing the land to just ordinary, everyday people. It says that the enclosure movement allowed wealthy landowners to take over land that had been open to common people. Common people used to have access to land. Common people used to be able to have your cows and your chickens and your goats and your pigs just kind of like on this commonly held land. Well, that came to an end with this enclosure movement. This common land was closed off. And that creates two problems. Well, a problem and an opportunity. One of the opportunities is now that there's just a few rich white people own the land. And if you have a bunch of land, you're willing to take some risks. Like if I'm a farmer, if I'm just like a small town farmer, I'm not going to grow something new because I'm just going to really grow what I've always grown. I've always grown wheat, I've always grown barley, I've always grown whatever. I'm not going to like switch it up. Like even for us, when we go to restaurants, we probably order like the same 3 meals at any restaurant you ever go to. It's like you have your go-to. So people generally don't want to like switch things up. But if I own a lot of land, I say, yeah, go ahead, plant the new stuff, plant the potatoes, plant the corn, see what happens. It says, now in control of land, these wealthy landowners were open to experimenting with new crops. They're okay with that. Now, like a regular peasant may not have wanted to try the new potato. A peasant who owned a little piece of land may not have wanted to try corn. But these rich landowners said, you know what? I have no problem. Let's say it doesn't work out, it's fine. We've got plenty more land where that came from. So that's a good thing because it turns out potatoes and corn are great. It turns out a lot of calories packed in this. It turns out really cheap. But the fact that I'm a poor farmer and I can't like graze my animals anymore, that means I can't support myself. Where am I going to have to move to survive if I can't make a living out in the country anymore? Yeah, exactly. It says on your handout, this enclosure movement forced commoners off the land and to the cities. To the cities. That's where people are starting to move. So there's good about the enclosure movement, and there's bad. Bad, force off my land, we're going to have to move to the cities. The good thing is, the few people that do own the land, they're taking risks, and it turns out that was actually a good risk. Turns out potatoes and corn, great investment. Turns out it's something worth doing. Well, let's go to trade and inventiveness. So on your handout, Europeans at this time, as we know, after 1492, there's colonies, right? We've talked about the colonial system, and that helped increase a global market. The big example of a global market, what do we call that? That network that connects Europe to Africa, Africa to the Americas, and America back to Europe. What do we call that? Two possible terms. Triangular trade, what else? Atlantic circuit, right? A circuit is only complete when you like go all the way. What were they bringing from Europe to Africa? Guns, and more broadly, manufactured goods in general that they didn't have the ability to make in Africa, but guns. And in Africa, what did they really desire ultimately in the 1700s? Enslaved Africans. They brought over those enslaved Africans. What do we call that part, that third leg of the journey? The what? The Middle Passage, right? And that was terrible. We studied and saw that. And what were these enslaved Africans forced to create in the Americas? Well, I mean, they were forced to make babies, but they didn't want them to because any child is slave. But what work were they doing in the Americas, in European slavery? Well, all slaves doing hard labor, but what kind of specific hard labor? Yeah, like agriculture, like they're farming, right? And then after they farm, where's all those goods being sent after they're harvested? Ultimate, bigger picture than the landlord. Where's the landlord going to do with all the sugar and all the rice and all the indigo? He's going to send it back to Europe. That's why it's a circuit. It's only a circuit if you complete the circuit, right? So manufactured goods from Europe to Africa, enslaved Africans to America, crops from America to Europe, and then the circle goes again and again and again. So actually global trade is going up. And number two, it says Europeans had an increasing demand. And if there was one crop that Europeans wanted enslaved Africans to work on, what would it have been? More important than cotton. Sugar. You'll write down sugar. Good job. Sugar. Could you / would you get rid of the sugar in your diet? And I'm going to say that none of you would get rid of the sugar in your coffee, your tea, your drinks, your cakes, your candies, all those things that we have. Turns out sugar is amazing and we like sugar. Global market. And then I gave you the example of the triangular trade and the Atlantic circuit. And now I'm saying that the one product that helped really drive this was sugar. Without sugar, there probably would not be slavery like we saw happen in world history. Probably be few black people in America today if we as humans didn't like sugar, where we decided, yeah, I know that I want sugar. I know that means slavery. And most Europeans said, yeah, I think that's worth it. I think it's worth, getting to be able to have something sweet and owning another human being. The third line, there is also another thing that Europeans that were getting wealthier had a greater demand for. And we'll write down there was a large European demand for textiles. Textiles is another word for what? We've talked about this 100 times. What? Cloth, like material, right? And the more money you have, the more clothes you want. In fact, our society is a perfect example. I would bet that for many of us, if we went to our closets, maybe 20 to 30% of your clothing you own probably is clothing you don't actually even wear in regular rotation. I would bet, based on just like surveys of other classes, that some of you have more than 10 pairs of shoes. And if you like, this often, not always, is the girls, but I have had periods where a boy said he has 10 pairs of tennis shoes and they're all still in the boxes because he collects shoes. This is like a thing that happens in America. We want more clothing. And the thing about clothing is that it's going to require, ultimately, much later, enslaved Africans working in cotton and sending it to these factories where a kid getting way underpaid is going to work on a machine to make it happen. So we see sugar and textiles. And we also see something happening at this time It says on the handout, educated people spread ideas, and there's no internet yet. So, what invention will help make knowledge go viral? The printing press. You'll write down the printing press. We've actually seen an example of ideas going viral because what religious movement was spread in part through the printing press? The Protestant Reformation. You might remember Martin Luther said, hey, I don't agree with the Catholic Church because of these 95 reasons. And there were people before Luther who disagreed with the church, but most of the time it was like, hey, I don't like the Catholic Church, and then you were like arrested and burned at the stake, and that was like the end of your story. But now Martin Luther could say, I don't agree with the church, and I'm going to print those reasons why, and I'm going to like pass them out to everyone. So information would go viral at this time. Now, in addition to the printing press in general, there's a specific publication that really helps spread knowledge. Now, today, if you have a problem with your cell phone, or if there's something that you wanted to figure out, where could you go if you didn't personally know someone that knew how to like fix your car, or that you can Google it, or you could like go on a YouTube tutorial of how to change your oil or how to insulate your pipes, or pretty much anything you can like look up a tutorial on YouTube. Well, at this time, there is a publication that became super famous that if you wanted to know anything, you could look in this book and it'd have pictures, it would have like step-by-step directions. It would tell you pretty much of every topic and a little article on everything you need to know about what that thing is and how to do it. It says on the handout that this French collection was called actually the encyclopedia. Our word encyclopedia, like we also have our related term Wikipedia, it comes from an actual set of books made in France. And any topic you could ever think of was put in the encyclopedia. It had many topics with diagrams and articles for explanation. Like there'd be like a little explanatory article about how to plant corn, or how to use a telescope, or how to do X, Y, or Z. This encyclopedia with the printing press helped information go viral. Many topics, diagrams, and articles. Last section, we're done after this last section. Talking about where did the Industrial Revolution begin, it says the first place the Industrial Revolution took place, you go right down, was Britain. Of all the places on planet Earth, of all the countries that exist, it was in England, it was in Great Britain that we see the very first example of industrialization. On the second line on your handout, it says that the reason why this happened, the thing that spurred it, the thing that caused it, it says technological improvement was mainly centered in the production of textiles, which is what's happened in this picture. People want cheap clothing. People want lower prices. People want things to be made quicker. So they say, you know, we got to figure out how can we get machines to make this happen. It was centered in the production of textiles. And the first type of power that's going to run these machines will, it says on your handout, it was increased by steam power. We'll talk more about steam power a little bit later in the week. But we see steam power coupled with these machines cranking out cloth in ways that had never been done before. Well, finally, as we close our time, there are 10 reasons why Great Britain took the lead. Well, let's talk about those 10 together. Well, number one, let's say that I am in Great Britain and I wanna do a business, but I'm a little nervous because I don't have, all the money I need. So what can I use to help spread the risk and share the profits if it goes well? Number one, I want you to write down, they had joint stock companies. You remember the general idea of a joint stock company is that I don't have enough money. I need, let's say, $100,000. And I'm willing to sell shares to you guys so that all of you can buy a piece of my company for a cost. And if you do that, what I am doing is I'm spreading the risk among a lot of you. And so if the business goes bad, none of us are like bankrupt. We all lost a chunk. We all invested, but none of us are financially destroyed. And if I do well, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to share part of the profits with you guys. That's called a joint stock company. It's something that people believed in and used in Great Britain. Number two, I also need a place where I can actually buy shares of different companies. And where would I buy? I'm not going to go to a grocery store. I'm not going to go to a supermarket. Where am I going to buy shares? And we still do this today of Google or Apple or Netflix or Amazon. Number two, we're going to write down they had stock markets. The stock market, you're not like walking away with anything physical. You can go to the stock market like in Wall Street in New York and not have anything in your hand, but you own a little bit of Amazon. You own a little bit of Google or Netflix or Facebook. We still have stock markets today. Number three, let's say I want to build a new colony, but I don't have the $10 million to do it. Where can I get $10 million? I can get it from what? From banks. And number three, we see banks as a thing that Great Britain has and other places don't have in the same way. Number four, let's say that I use a big loan to start a plantation in Jamaica. And we collect sugar. It's awesome. It's great. We harvest it. But let's say the sugar gets sent back to England and a hurricane happens, which hurricanes happen all the time. Let's say my ship sinks. Well, that's terrible because like I put all my money into like the sugar crop. But what can I get that would protect me from an accident like that? Number four, we see the invention of insurance. Even to this day, you know, a lot of my neighbors, because of the freeze, they lost their pipes. Their pipes bust, and maybe some of you had your pipes bust and water was everywhere. My neighbor, she had multiple pipes bust in her kitchen, and that meant, like right now, if you look in her front lawn, her entire cabinets of her kitchen are there because they had to pull it and pull all the drywall. And that's terrible, but you know what makes it a little less terrible? Because she's a homeowner, she's got home insurance, right? Same thing, you pay car insurance, like full coverage, and that sucks because you're paying hundreds of dollars a month. And you're like, well, this is stupid. But it's great because if you ever get hit by someone, if you have full coverage, then that's going to pay for a new car. Well, we see insurance at this time as well, and that makes it easier to make a profit and make money. Number five, what is a patent for? Yeah, you know, like let's say that I decide to write a novel, a teen romance about vampires or something, and I have this idea and I write the book. I can get a copyright, which means no one can steal my story and just like publish it. And the same thing is I have something that we have in England that protects not my books, but my ideas and my inventions. If I come up with an invention, I get a patent, which means no one can copy that and steal it and make money off of me. If I have my idea protected, I'm willing to like be an inventor. I'm willing to like come up with ideas. I'm willing to experiment. But if I don't have a government that protects my ideas, I'm not gonna like spend a lot of time working hard trying to make things better because someone's just gonna steal it from me. For number five, we will write down that they had a patent system that protected, you'll write down intellectual property rights. Intellectual property rights. That means things that you came up with was protected in England, and that's not true everywhere. In some places, people could just copy your idea, say they made it, and grow rich at your expense. But England had a patent system that protected intellectual property rights. I'm willing to take risks if I know I can be protected. Number six. Britain was also one of the most socially fluid societies. You know, something that's fluid can flow from one place to another. And if I say that you are socially fluid, it means that like just because you're born poor doesn't mean you have to like die poor. It means that if you work hard, you can actually increase your social standing. And one of the things that allowed people to start businesses and for those businesses to do well, it says for letter A, was that there was very little government obstacles to commerce. Little government obstacles to commerce. In other words, if I wanted to start a business, there weren't 1,000 rules I had to keep in order to start a business. And that's good for me if I'm looking at starting a factory. In fact, because people were starting factories, letter B says there was the possibility of social mobility. Social mobility means where you move up. Your grandfather may have come to America poor, but your parents did better than your grandpa. And you, if you are responsible, will do better than your parents. That's social mobility. That just because you're born poor doesn't mean you have to die poor unless you make some unhealthy choices. Number 7, to aid in transportation, I don't have trains, I don't have trucks or airplanes yet. Everything has to be moved by, if I want to move massive amounts of stuff, I need to put them on boats, which is cool because it says Britain had many rivers, but what if I want to get stuff where there's not like a river and I still want to put it on a boat? What will I have to make to allow that to happen? What's that? Yeah, we'll write down rivers and canals. They start digging massive networks of canals so they could still put stuff on boats. Turns out England's pretty small, tons of rivers that are there naturally, and what's not there naturally, they say, well, we'll just build canals there. Number 8, to make these machines work, I need to burn something to boil the water, to make the steam, to turn the turbines. What am I going to have in mass to burn to make this electricity? Better than wood, coal. It turns out that Britain had a natural and abundant supply of 2 things, coal being one, but a second thing, that if I want to build tall buildings, if I want to have frames of eventually high rises, what material do I need to have plenty of? Well, we'll write down iron. They had tons of coal, tons of iron, blessed by geography. Number 9, governments in Europe. These are their rivals. What about the rest of Europe? Why England? How come France isn't doing anything? Well, France had strong monarchies. You might remember that we talked about the example of France, that there was a king so powerful that in France he had the biggest mansion in the world. And even if people didn't like the king of France, he'd invite them over to party and drink and gamble, and real soon they'd forget about their problems. What was that palace called in France? Versailles, right? Back in Europe, the mainland, there was these strong monarchies with strict rules that limited new technologies. Because the kings of these countries had such tight control, they actually had hundreds of rules and hundreds of regulations, and it made it really hard for new technologies to exist. England had a lot more freedom, which allowed for these technologies to exist. And lastly, number 10, it would only be actual fighting and actual revolutions that we'll see later that would sweep away these oppressive governments and regulations. It would take literal war to get rid of these governments with their oppressive hands and oppressive regulations. This gives England the head start for the Industrial Revolution. Make sure your name is on your handout. Make sure you pass that up. We're going to turn that in